if you're not taking care of the billions of dollars of infrastructure that the public's already paid for, you really don't put yourself in a good position to ask them for more money to build more stuff. I've talked to business people, to firms large and small. They don't necessarily need more. They need reliable. Investing in a state of good repair, building an innovative system on a foundation of competence is something that I think is really important.
Well, Roger, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast to chat with me today.
Happy to be here.
I'm really excited about this episode personally because of what I've read about you and your career. But I thought it would be good for you to do a little bit of an introduction to yourself, a little bit about your career history, and then something that you are passionate about.
Well, sure. I've been at this a while. I grew up an Army brat. My father was in the Army, and I went to school at the University of Virginia in civil engineering. Came out to Portland, Oregon, and got into transportation. And I think I've done a lot of stuff over the last 45 years or so. But I think four things that have really stood out to me. When I got to Portland, I realized we were uh, a city about the size of Stuttgart, where I went to high school. Stuttgart had 13 tram lines, and Portland had none. We were just getting started with light rail, which is a heavier gauge, and we had one light rail line, and we were building more, and Portland's done a good job with that. But once you got into downtown, there weren't a lot of ways to get around from light rail, and building more light rail through the downtown would have been really destructive. So I took my experience from Germany and my love of both transportation and land use planning, and on the back of a napkin in a bar, which is where most good ideas come from, sketched out a plan for a streetcar system in Portland. Took that to my boss, and we went to our boss at Earl Blumenauer, who was at the time a city commissioner in charge of transportation and land use, later a congressman here in the United States. And he said, sure, let's do that. And so we did. And we built the Portland streetcar system. While I was working on that, a bunch of folks from Aspen, Colorado came to Oregon looking for housing and transportation solutions for their mountain communities. And I'm a big skier and thought that that's a great opportunity for me to, maybe do some good and maybe do well while I'm doing it. So I started working with the city and with the counties up there and the Colorado Department of Transportation. I always thought a rail system would have been great for Aspen, but that was just not to be. So we put the first rural bus rapid transit system together in the United States, created a transportation authority, 3 counties and 7 cities, and created, after the Denver metropolitan area, the largest transit system in Colorado with the Roaring Fork Transportation Authority. Later in my career, when I was at Smart Growth America, I had the opportunity to take over from a great friend and a great person, Barbara McCann, who started the National Complete Streets Coalition. I was the second director of that group. The notion being you should be able to get around in our rights of way, regardless of how you get around, and that it should be safe and convenient and affordable. And making complete streets really a mainstream theme in American transportation, a great opportunity. And then the thing I've been working on most recently is DOT innovation. State departments of transportation here in the United States, together we spend about $200 billion US a year investing in transportation. So we have enormous influence on the built environment. Being innovative, being multimodal, being safe, those are things that I started with at Smart Growth America, working with DOTs on being innovative. I was asked to join a DOT Shortly after that, I became the secretary of that DOT, the minister, and spent 9 years doing that. And I think perhaps made a difference.
So, speaking of your tenure as the Secretary of Washington DOT, it emphasized a lot of this fix it first approach to transport. I was hoping you might be able to kind of unpack what that means and maybe some of the key wins that you had in prioritizing maintenance and preservation over, say, kind of never ending expansion.
Yeah, well, we're on a journey, and we definitely not gotten to a place where fix it first is how the funding is going. But, you know, I look at what was going on in Washington State, which is, I don't think atypical. We're one of 52 DOTs in the United States, but in Washington State, we were booming the last 25 years. This first quarter century of the 21st century, our population grew 35.5%. Our economy grew 40%, almost twice the national average here in the United States. During that time, we spent over $40 billion expanding highways in Washington State. Our statewide pavement inventory grew 2.5%. To me, that's an indication that you don't need to grow the highway miles to grow the economy. The economy doesn't run on the infrastructure that you wish you had. The economy runs on the infrastructure that everybody takes for granted every day. And when you take it for granted, you wind up where we were in Washington State, where we were funding less than half of what we should have been funding in terms of maintenance and preservation of pavement and bridges. And that's a problem. We need to fix that problem. Fix it first is the mantra. I think fix it appropriately. You need some investment in other things, but if you're not taking care of the billions of dollars of infrastructure that the public's already paid for, you really don't put yourself in a good position to ask them for more money to build more stuff. So that's where we are with Fix It First. It's like I've talked to business people, to firms large and small. They don't necessarily need more. They need reliable. So when an expansion joint on a bridge breaks at 8 o'clock in Monday morning, right in the middle of the rush hour, you have a system that's unreliable, and the joint breaks because you're not taking care of it. Shame on you. Investing in a state of good repair, building an innovative system on a foundation of competence is something that I think is really important.
Did you face much pushback or challenge in advocating for that fix it first approach?
Yeah, from the advocates, for the lobbyists, for the big new exciting thing. You don't do a lot of ribbon cuttings on preservation projects. You don't you don't run your political career on, I brought this to my constituents. I brought the same road, but in better shape. That's not quite as exciting. So there wasn't really a lot of resistance to preservation and maintenance. It was just, well, we don't have the money because we have commitments to do these other things. Those commitments are all discretionary decisions, but commitments nonetheless. And when you look at how uh, politics works in every country on the planet, I'm speaking as a subject matter expert about the condition of our existing infrastructure. That's one voice in that debate. If I'm the only voice in that debate, I'm not going to get a lot of traction. So, what is interesting, we still haven't gotten where we need to be, but we have lots more people, lots more interests, we have people from business, we have people from the environmental community, we have people from the equity community that are all talking about preservation and maintenance as the appropriate thing to do. But it's still going to take some time because that bright, shiny object is certainly popular.
So I think, like a lot of places around the world, people will use the safe systems approach to create safer communities. So it's safe streets, safe road users, safe speeds, safe vehicles, and then a focus on improving post crash care. But Washington State has kind of touted it or floated the idea of maybe adding a sixth pillar to that framework. I was hoping you might be able to talk about what that kind of sixth pillar was and then why it was included on top of the already existing other pillars in safe systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Washington State included it in our safety action plan or safety strategic plan for the state. And the notion is safer land use. The safe systems approach has been around for a while. It has not been embraced necessarily in the United States until fairly recently when I was president of AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. We um, passed a resolution on highway safety, given the incredible carnage, the horrific carnage we're seeing here in the United States. And we agreed the safe system approach was the way forward. But as we were talking about that, I began to think about what do all car crashes have in common? We think about speeding, we think about distracted driving, we think about drunk driving, we think about, unsafe roads, that kind of thing. But what all car crashes have in common is cars. And in talking with public health advocates who have become a part of the Complete Streets movement, when public health advocates see a threat to people, their first strategy is to remove people from the threat. How do we get people out of cars? Now, um, I will be the very first person to acknowledge that the United States has a car centric economy. We have a car centric culture. When you think about all the people who make their living building cars, selling cars, servicing cars, insuring cars, fueling cars, what have you, it's a huge part of our economy. Cars are going to be around. But at the same time, in the state that I was privileged to serve as secretary of, between a quarter and a third of the people that live there don't drive. They're too young. They're no longer able to drive. They're not willing to drive. In a few cases, we don't let them drive. But in Washington State, that was 2 million people. So how do we make them safer? We make them safer by creating environments, by linking transportation investment with land use policy and land use investment to give people the choice of living some or all of their lives without relying on an automobile and in an environment where they are separated from automobiles. So that's walkable urbanism, that's, being downtown, that's safe streets, the notion of creating places where you can meet all your needs without a car, if you choose to do so. There's no requirement to do it, but if you choose that life, you ought to be able to live it. And unfortunately, in much of the world, you have no choice but to live in an auto-dominated, auto-centric built environment. We need to change that.
So ultimately, you've got other factors that will determine transportation budgets, so legislature or governors and other levels of politics in there. How did you work within these frameworks to advocate for more longer term or sustainable investments in safer land use and more kind of walkable, multimodal cities and communities?
You need to be consistent and persistent in what you do. You've got to build coalitions and you provide them with facts. In Washington State, in the United States, on this planet, we've invested a lot of money to solve the problem of congestion. Our highways are congested. We need to be spending more money. In Washington State, the cost of congestion to the economy was about $4.5 billion a year. In the United States, 200 billion a year is wasted stuck in traffic. And that fact is used to justify spending money on expanding highways. Now, crashes cost Washington State's economy $23.2 billion a year. Nobody had that $23.2 billion number. In the United States, congestion, 200 billion a year, crashes cost the US economy $1.4 trillion a year. That's 7 times what all of the DOTs in the United States combined spend on transportation. So what I try to do as a subject matter expert is get digestible facts out there. Congestion, 4.5 billion, safety crashes, 23 billion. So where should we be investing? People who want change, who want something different, who want something better, need the data, need the facts, need the approaches, need the sound bites, if you will, when they go and talk to their elected officials, when they consider engaging in the political process, when they consider or they're thinking about what's important to them. What's that old thing about once the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago? The next best time is right now.
I wanted to go back to the idea that you were talking about with separating people from cars. Um, Encouraging dense and transit-oriented housing is a very much like a significant shift, both, I think, politically and structurally, but also, behavior and mentally for people living in cities, from that traditional car-centric development and stepping more towards integrated multimodal land use planning. What strategies have been the most effective? You've kind of mentioned one, which is having those little facts and figures that are readily available. What other strategies have been effective in advancing this idea towards transit-oriented development, and maybe how can state DOTs promote it better?
Well, it's public transportation is one thing, but
Mm,
walkable places is really important. You got to remember that the auto-centric world is less than 100 years old. It's always been that way. No, it hasn't. The vast majority of the time, it has not been that way at all. And I own a car. There are things I do that I need a car for. But I have had some amazing relationships. I had the planning director for Thimphu, the capital of Bhutan, came to the United States to go to graduate school, and he interned with me for a few weeks when I was working in Missoula, Montana. And he went to our city council at the end of his internship and gave a presentation. What is it with you Americans in your backyards? What goes on behind those fences? Do you barbecue naked back there? Because you have so much space that's just for you. We in the transportation space think about public works, about the constructed thing. Planners think about public space, but none of us are thinking about public life. In Bhutan, they talk about gross national happiness as opposed to gross national product. The Netherlands, they're talking about public life. In Copenhagen, it's a place I learned a lot of this about a public life. If you have safe and convenient and attractive parks, you don't need a big yard. Walkable urbanism is not, and a compact development is not a, eat your spinach kind of thing. It can be a very, very high quality of life if you're thinking about public life, about public spaces that work, about how does a person spend the 24 hours that they're given each day? There's a part you spend asleep, the part you spend at work. How do you spend the rest of that? If you spend the rest of it all by yourself in front of the TV versus a part of a vibrant community, those are the things we need to talk about. The compact development is not for those of us who can't afford the McMansion on the acreage on the outside of town. It can be, it should be a better alternative for people who want that alternative. We need to be thinking about it that way. We need to be advocating for it that way. And we need to be making investments with that in mind.
Back again slightly to talk again about your tenure as Washington State Secretary of Transportation. So you were involved in a whole bunch of projects. You've mentioned a couple of them, the Complete Streets Coalition. You mentioned the Portland Streetcar. You also mentioned the Aspen Bus Rapid Transit System. Are there any of these initiatives? I feel like we all have favorites. Are there any of these initiatives that you're really proud of, and how have they maybe shaped Washington State's and possibly even maybe the US more broadly in terms of the transport landscape?
Well, something that I'm really proud of is I created in Washington State DOT an active transportation division with a division manager who had staff and a budget and authority. We don't call it alternative transportation. Calling walking and biking alternative transportation is kind of like calling women alternative men. It active transportation is a legitimate mode of transportation. And if we are the Department of Transportation, we should be representing and investing in all the ways that people get around. Like I said, a third of us don't drive. So creating that division resulted in an active transportation plan for Washington State that won some national awards. It resulted in our state legislature adopting a complete streets policy. Legislative leadership came back and said, okay, Washington State DOT, any project you start that's worth more than a half a million dollars, which is basically everything we do, has to incorporate complete streets principles. It's been baked into the mix. The legislature also came back and said, transit agencies, if you want state money, you have to make public transportation free for people 18 and younger. And so in Washington State, public transportation is free for people 18 and younger. So there are things that we're doing. We build big projects. I mean, my goodness, we built the tunnel under downtown Seattle. We built the longest floating bridge in the world. The tunnel under downtown Seattle is technically a really cool thing. Technically, it's really cool. But the waterfront that we opened up and reconnecting downtown Seattle with nature, with the Salish Sea, that is phenomenal. The longest floating bridge in the world, really cool thing. We actually in Washington State manage four of the five longest floating bridges in the world. But we're some of the only people that do it. Now, maybe we're crazy, who knows? But what's neat about that bridge is the bicycle and pedestrian connection across Lake Washington, miles of access that lets people live on one side of the lake and work on the other. Uh, that's cool stuff. Another thing was growing a team of exceptional public servants that are talented, they're passionate, and they will be making things happen long after I'm gone.
On that, what advice would you give to future transport leaders who wanted to kind of follow this same vein of sustainable, fix it first, multimodal policies?
Think about what you'd want in your life and go for it. And also remember that you need a job, but you don't need that job, that particular job. So I could have done something else besides sketch that Portland streetcar out. I chose to do it, and I need to take this to somebody to make it a reality. The National Complete Streets Coalition was heresy. Oh my goodness, streets are for cars. It was heresy at the time. But people pushed it and they made it happen. Our active transportation program in Washington State that's just that spandex bunch of crazy people that ride bike. It's not, but it's not because young professionals, young people, and older people, but they just said, I'm going to go for it. This is my community. I'm going to make it a better place. Do some good.
You've obviously done quite a lot, and still are quite involved in the ITS spaces. What is next for you professionally?
Well, for me, goodness, my tenure, as the secretary in Washington State was the kind of the highlight of my career to date. The people I worked with, from Governor Inslee on down, everybody on the team working at that national level. It was really, really cool. With the changing of administrations, I stepped down, and I'm taking a little time off. I'm on sabbatical. People think I retired. No, I'm on sabbatical. My friend Jeffrey Tumlin from San Francisco, when he stepped down from the MTA there, he's on sabbatical, and I ripped that off from him. But I'll be the skiing right now is great. I'm up in the mountains. Skiing's great. When ski season's over, I'm going to be back at it. Use the time I have left, one, to have a lot of fun. I've always made a point of having fun, and educate some people, and hopefully make a difference.
Roger, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast to chat with me today.
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. It's always fun to talk about this stuff.
To learn more about any of the guests that we have on the Bite Size podcast, you can check out our show notes at compassiot.substack.com. Alternatively, if you'd like to know more about the company that runs this podcast, Compass IoT, you can visit our website, which is compassiot.com.au. Until next time.